So now we're switching gears, going into more kind of professional documentary filmmaking. This is where quality is the most important thing, and weight and size don't really matter. I don't really have a fully professional filmmaking setup yet. For that you'd need a camera that's like well over $10,000 and really high quality audio equipment and lighting gear and all that kind of stuff. So what I have I would consider is kind of like intermediate, but you can get really professional results from this gear. It just requires a little bit of workaround, and it's not quite as streamlined of a process. So for my main camera, I'm still using the same camera. This is a Sony a7 III full frame camera that shoots in 4K at 30 FPS. You can get some good slow motion out of here too. You can get 120 frames per second at 1080. It shoots 4K at 100 megabits a second, which means that there is quite a bit of information packed into each frame, and that gives you a lot of range when you're color grading later on. There's a lot of different types of 4K actually, because a lot of cell phones shoot 4K now, but they don't have very much information behind each frame, so you can't color grade 4K footage coming out of a phone very well. It'll fall apart pretty quickly if you try and push that image. So that's the advantage of having a camera that can shoot at 100 megabits per second. I'm using the same lens too, just because that's what I have, and it gives me pretty good results. This is a 24 to 240 millimeter Sony lens. It's an all-in-one lens. Not ideal if you're going for the highest quality, but for like run and gun type documentary filmmaking, it's gives you a lot of variability. One way that you can kind of get a lot of the features that those expensive cameras have on a small sort of compact body like this is by kitting it out. So the first thing you'd get is a cage that goes onto the camera, and it screws into the tripod mount here. And basically what that allows you to do is to attach all kinds of accessories to the camera. So once the cage is on there, then I can add a monitor. And a bigger monitor just kind of helps you see what's in focus a little bit easier. It helps you check your exposure levels and stuff like that. This hood just velcros on there, so I can use that in sunlight. It just kind of gives me a more precise view of what I'm actually filming. Compared to my outdoor hiking films and stuff, precision is not quite as important. When you're doing more professional level documentaries, you have to be a lot more precise with your shots. Then another very important thing with this type of filmmaking is to have a neutral density filter. Neutral density is just a fancy way of saying dark filter. This is a variable ND filter, and it allows different amounts of light to go into the lens based on how you spin the ring on the outside. And the whole point of that is to be able to change your exposure with this filter instead of changing your settings on your camera. For professional filmmaking, you want to have very consistent looking shots. Every shot should look similar to the next shot, at least as far as camera settings. Different apertures and different shutter speeds can really change the look of a video. A general rule is to keep your shutter speed at twice what your frame rate is. So if you're shooting at 30 frames per second, then you want to be shooting at 1/60th of a second for shutter speed. And what that does is that it allows you to have some motion blur, which kind of makes the video look more natural. If you have a really fast shutter speed, things are going to be kind of choppy. So after having a decent camera, then you'll have to have some good audio gear. Having good audio is just as important as having high quality video for this type of work. And mostly what you need good audio for is for shooting interviews. And I have two tools for that. Ideally, you would use a lavalier mic for shooting an interview. This box goes on your subject, and they wear the lavalier mic on their collar up there. Then that transmits to this box, which I can attach to the cage, and then that plugs into the camera. If I'm shooting more than one person at a time, I only have one lavalier mic, so I would have to switch to a different type of microphone. And that's when I would use this shotgun mic. This is a pretty high quality XLR shotgun mic. And one of the features of those real expensive cameras is that they have XLR inputs. This is just kind of a superior connection for microphones. But since my camera doesn't have that, I have to use an adapter box. So basically this just has two XLR inputs, some dials to change the levels of each microphone, and then it has a headphone jack as an output, so then I can plug that into my camera. It's kind of clunky, but it's a good workaround for getting really high quality shotgun microphone to plug into my mirrorless camera. And then this one would usually not be on the camera. I would put this on its own tripod and put it close to the subject, and then have the cable running back to my camera. And then probably the third most important thing is to have a really high quality tripod. Something that's heavy and stable. This is a Manfrotto tripod, and the most important feature of this is that it has a really smooth fluid head, so you can get those smooth pans and stuff like that. And because it is a bigger and bulkier tripod, it's going to be much more stable too. So that's kind of like the essentials. You need a good camera, good audio equipment, and a good tripod if you want to make a high quality movie. And then after that, the next thing I would get is a decent B camera. So for that this is my first mirrorless camera. It used to be my A cam, and now it's my B cam since I upgraded. This is the Sony a6500. I'd suggest getting a similar camera to your A camera. They should be similar brands or similar types of cameras, so the video coming out of these cameras looks the same, because you'll be cutting back and forth between these cameras and you don't want there to be like an obvious difference between the video. And usually I'll put my Rode mic on this, and then this is kind of like a backup camera when I'm shooting interviews. I'm planning on using almost all the footage from the A cam when I'm shooting interviews, but I'll have this running too, kind of as a wide angle, and I'll be able to use this to cut to if for whatever reason the shot from the A cam isn't usable. It's good to have that kind of redundancy, so you can just cut back and forth between the two shots. And when you're editing interviews, people stumble over their words and maybe they have to repeat sentences or whatever. There's a lot of things that you have to cut out, so it's good to be able to have a second camera to cut to when you make those cuts. And then lighting is also really important for having professional looking videos. That's not something that I've had to focus on too much yet in my career. A lot of the documentaries that I've worked on are kind of run and gun. We're shooting outside a lot and using natural lighting as much as possible. But there are definitely times when the scene is just too dark, or you have to like accent something with some lighting. That's when this little thing comes in handy. This is just a little LED light panel. It's pretty bright for how small it is, but obviously it's kind of limited as far as what it can do. But it's a really handy little tool to have in the kit. And this can really change the look of a scene and make it look a little bit more professional. It comes with these gels of different kinds, so you can change the temperature of the lighting and stuff. And then I also have a big halogen light, which I'm using right now to light the scene. It's really big and bulky, and the light gets really hot. It'll actually heat up an entire room after it's been on for a while, but it throws out a ton of light. So if you're inside and the scene is just too dark, that is really important to have too. This slider, which I bought for the purpose of shooting time lapses on, it also has a video mode, so it'll slide across the track in real time. And this is really nice for getting kind of artistic B-roll. You can actually set it up to loop, so it'll go back and forth on its own, and it'll just consistently do that without having to touch it. So this is kind of like a good thing to put a B camera on when you're shooting an interview, and it's kind of a nice thing to cut to if you need to like give a little bit of motion or action to your interview shot. This camera will always be moving back and forth. So this is a really nice kind of extra tool to have to give your videos a little bit more of a professional look. But that's pretty much it as far as filmmaking gear that I use for work. This kit is always expanding. I'm always reinvesting money back into it, but it goes to show that you don't need like a ton of cameras or really expensive equipment to make a very professional looking documentary.